This is Supply Chain Breakdown, and today we will be breaking down the major theories and themes of Joannes new book, Introduction to Supply Chain. My name's Connor, you know that, Communications Director here at Lokad, and to my left, as always, Lokad's founder, CEO, and resident wordsmith, Joannes Now, manning the live chat as always, Alex Tikhonov. Alexis, skажи привет. Get your questions to him as soon as possible, and we will get to them a little bit later. But to the main event, Joannes. To my left, I have your new book, Introduction to Supply Chain, Room Cam 1. It's a lovely book. Why did you write this book, sir?
The first few years of Lokad have been rough. When I started in 2008, I started with the idea that supply chain was an extensively, I would say, mature field of study and practice, with like almost at the time over 60 years of literature. Now we are at 70, I would say, since the end of World War II, with 1 million plus papers. With, I mean, I checked recently, there is over 10,000 books about supply chain in English available on Amazon. So it's like a massive field. And my take was to actually bring this nicely packaged to the cloud with a SaaS app, while my competitors at the time, the incumbents, were already just using still fat clients. So they were not doing, I would say, SaaS at the time. For enterprise apps, there was only NetSuite and Salesforce that were like web-based. The rest was just not. So I thought, well, I can just reuse this very mature theory and put it on the cloud, and it will work. Client will come and it will work. So putting it on the cloud was easy. Client did come, but nothing worked. Nothing worked, and it took me years to identify all the problems, and turn out that in the, I would say, the mainstream supply chain theory is just bogus. It doesn't work. Nothing works in it, and that's actually, and that's I think we could even use the word mental.
Mental.
This is now it is extremely strange when you have like a million. Again, we're talking 1 million plus papers, and nothing works. Nothing works. And you have surreal discussions with supply chain practitioners that say, yes, I mean, next year we are going to actually use the safety stock formula. But for now, we still use something a little bit weird in our spreadsheets. But next year we will start to do the right thing. You know, we will start to use the true serious math, and it will be good. It turned out that no, that's exactly what those companies have been trying for like decades, and it turned out that what actually works was classes of heuristics that are completely absent in the literature, and that again, most of what passes for the supply chain literature just do not work. And so Lokad has been pioneering, I would say, very different ways to do supply chain. The people who have been following this channel for a while might be aware, and I decided to have like an up-to-date compilation and by the way, the theory that we have developed at Lokad has been evolving. I started a whole series of lectures back in
2017.
In 2017. So it has been quite a few years. A lot of things have been refined since that time. It's overall it's much more consistent. It is, and there are also things that are just better.
Well, again, listening to that overview, and again, you correct me where I'm wrong, but like typically when someone writes a book, let's say in supply chain, it is to either fill or address a gap. But listening to that, it sounds like you're saying this replaces more or less all pre-existing knowledge, or is that an overstatement?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I would say, some kind of refoundation sort of exercise. And the problem really starts about where do you put supply chain in the tree of human knowledge. And what I'm defending is that the bulk of the literature falls in two camps that are equally wrong. So you have like half of the literature that comes about supply chain that comes in the camp of applied mathematics, and the fundamental problem that I have with this approach is that you produce supply chain papers, theories that cannot ever be disproven by reality. And when you think about it, it is very strange. Normally, if you have knowledge about something in the world, if your theory is wrong, the world should be able to contradict your theory. If your theory is immune to real-world feedback, what you're doing is essentially a pure exercise in logic, in mathematics. It's not, I would say, it's not part of the natural sciences, or actually, the sort of sciences, experimental sciences. So that's the problem with, I would say, the applied mathematics, is that essentially what they have is endless list of mathematical puzzles, and they cannot be disproven. And then you have another camp that is typically the sociology camp that only discuss about how to slice and dice the problem across large organizations. And so they adopt a sociology perspective. The problem is that this perspective doesn't say anything about the actual resolution, which is how do you allocate your resources, how do you make decisions to govern your flow. So you see, that's two bodies of literature. And in this book, I decided to have a third approach, which is, yes, it is applied economics. And as surprising as it may appear, this perspective is very, very largely absent from the entire literature.
Well, again, sort of to switch to the idea of supply chain as economics, in the book and I'm going to read this because it's a slight update on what was the historical definition of supply chain. So here in the book, you define it as mastery of optionality. Supply chain is mastery of optionality under variability in managing the flow of physical goods. In plain English, how does that definition differ from what was the prevailing understanding of supply chain?
That's the point, is that if you look, I can't even really remember the exact definition given on the Wikipedia for supply chain. That's the problem, is that first, most of the definitions are not about supply chain, but supply chain management. You see the difference. So you already are in the realm of sociology, where you say, I'm going to manage that. I'm going to apply some kind of division of labor. And so most of the definitions are extremely broad and say all things that pertains to acquisition of raw material, transformation, transportations, and keeping clients happy. And you see, most of the, I would say, supply chain definitions take like a whole paragraph, and they mention pretty much anything that pertains to the flow of physical goods. So that it's more like about cataloging. It's like acquiring raw materials, transporting them, storing them, transforming them, transporting them again, servicing clients, etc. So you see, it's most of the, I would say, supply chain definitions are, I would say, a catalog of stuff that company do while dealing with physical goods. And those decisions are absolutely not, I would say, crisp, because the problem is that it's if you follow those definitions, it's not even clear, for example, what differentiates industrial engineering and supply chain, or manufacturing, just the step of manufacturing and supply chain, or what really differentiates general corporate finance and supply chain, etc., etc. Those definitions really lack a very clear boundaries. And essentially, they are lacking some kind of essence, where you really clarify a clear intent, as opposed to cataloging stuff, where, for example, most supply chain definitions that you will find on the Wikipedia will not discuss, let's say, reverse logistics or whatever. Again, as soon as you look at things that are a little bit fringe, but still firmly in the square of supply chain, those very descriptive, enumerative definitions, they tend to miss that.
Well, so again, if you're talking about reimagining supply chain and the foundations of supply chain from the perspective of economics, how do you square that with what I know to be, because I'm familiar with the book, a generally light touch when it comes to mathematics? So again, other than maybe like the page numbers, you're not going to see many integers in the book. Like, you've deliberately gone for a more philosophical approach. So how do people take these economic theories if it's basically just words?
So first, there is, I would say, and that's really a problem that I have with most of academia nowadays, is that mathematics, because again, I've been trained as a mathematician, so there is no problem here. The problem that I have with mathematics as used, I would say, in most papers, is that it is just filler. So it is not conveying highly, I would say, powerful ideas. It is normally, if again, we are dealing with something that is branch of economics, so mathematics is not the point, it's an instrument. And if I want to publish a book where there is like mathematical instrument, the question is, will I be able to convey the point in a way that is less ambiguous, that is more concise? And that's what mathematical formulas are about. If you want to say, for example, the Maxwell equations, the four of them for electromagnetism, they are extremely compact, and in just literally 4 compact equations, I can convey what would take 20 pages of text if I were to describe those equations as text. So in this case, perfect. Throw the equations, those equations bring the insights. But if you look at, again, the vast majority of supply chain papers that are using math are not enlightening. They do not convey deep ideas. The sort of proof that are going on in the papers are not interesting. They are not, they don't demonstrate any kind of mathematical elegance. There is no hidden truth to be uncovered. It's just very procedural. It's the sort of things where give a master student a few hours and they will get to your proof. It's very procedural. There is very little surprises, and so and even in the, I would say, formalization of the problems, usually it's completely uninteresting. So bottom line is that you end up having something that is tedious to read, that is relatively verbose, because again, that's exact opposite in my experience with, I would say, math-heavy papers in supply chain, is that it's not about making the paper, very, very compact. On the contrary, you end up with pages and pages of stupid derivation. I would say stupid because they are very procedural. There is very you introduce all your variables and your formulas, and then you twist your formulas one step at a time, and it takes like pages and pages. In the end, there is very, very little insight. So that's the point. So in this book, I decided that again, mathematics and algorithms are, for example, what I qualify as auxiliary sciences of supply chain. So I try to really introduce the right concept, the right ideas, and then people who have the right background, let's say in mathematics, statistics, algorithms, they will be in a position to do those fairly mechanical derivation as needed with the right perspective.
Well, we're going to get into more of the theories in a little bit more detail, but I do want to actually, a little bit of an anecdote, I want to bring you back to, it was April last year, so around the time you started writing the book, and I keep meticulous notes, so it was Tuesday in April 2024, and we were having a chat, and you mentioned you were writing a book, and I remember I posed to you the following question. I don't know if you remember this, but I said to you, I picked 2 names that we both know, they're friends of the channel, they've appeared on the channel, and I said to you, so who's the target audience of this book? And I said, before you answer, you have this person, person A, with this profile, etc., and person B with this profile and this these qualifications. 2 very different profiles, but both in supply chain. And I said to you, who are you writing this book for? Is it person A or person B and associated profiles? And do you remember what you said to me?
I don't remember my answer.
So this is not staged. You don't actually remember. You said to me, it might surprise you, neither. So now 20 months later or thereabouts, you've written the book, it's published, it's available. Who is the target audience for your book?
So target audience was, it's a little bit, I would say, self-centered, but it was myself 20 years ago. But and again,
what do you mean by you 20 years ago?
So it means that if I had this book in my hands, before starting Lokad, everything would have been so much simpler. It would have saved me a decade of
Trial and error.
of I would say of misery. I mean, again, that's a weird part of when I say misery. That's a weird part about enterprise software is that even if your software doesn't work, it can be quite profitable.
Yeah.
So it was not misery in the financial sense, because that, again, magic of enterprise software. You have a product that doesn't work, clients are still knocking on your door. Magic, but not good. So that would have saved me and the teams at Lokad enormous amount of time. So that was the audience, and then I intentionally removed all the math from the main. There is a little bit in the annex, because I realized that first it was not really providing that much insights, And here there was I was inspired by another book called Basic Economics from Thomas Sowell, and it's beautifully written. And I realized that because most books about economics are quite math heavy, and I realized reading Basic Economics, I read the book to my daughter.
You gave it to me as well.
It's an excellent book, excellent introduction, that in fact, if you address the thing properly, you don't need any kind of math. They are just technicalities that are a little bit in the way of true understanding. So I realized that, well, if it can be done, it can for economics, it can certainly be done for supply chain, and that's the approach. There is a few things that have been postponed in the annex, but they are not. They are more like clarifying for the I would say tech savvy audience, or but it otherwise the book is fairly accessible to practitioners irrespective of their mathematical knowledge.
Well, from the book, so for anyone who has yet to read it online, it is available for free online. You can also order it on Amazon. Before we get into the weeds a bit, one of the things, and this is actually from, I've skipped to the end of the book essentially, in the looking onward section. So this is right at the tail end. And you propose, and I think this is a good takeaway for anyone who only watches this far, you propose a concrete test for supply chain progress. And it was your software, whatever it is, must generate unattended, auditable, so traceable decisions, or you must stop and explain why. So is that, in your opinion, the ultimate goal? I know you like philosophy, telos, of supply chain decision making.
It's the starting point.
Oh, okay.
It's literally because it's literally the starting point. Because until you have a system capable of generating unattended decisions with what Lokad we are calling 0% insanity, so those decisions are at least okay-ish, there is nothing crazy in it, so that until you reach this point where you can every single day generate all the decisions unattended, and they are 100% of them are good-ish, reasonable, you are not even in a position to do any kind of systematic improvement, because you're dealing with a very chaotic, semi-manual process, typically also quite bureaucratic. And it's impossible to benchmark anything. You can't A/B test anything. You can't reliably prove that whatever change you bring to the system is actually making the system better. And that's such a massive problem. So for me, this is where I say it's a starting point, because once you reach this point where you generate those unattended decisions with no insanity, even if they are not very, very good yet, at least you have something that you can A/B test. Now you can modify the system and dual run and say, okay, I have option A, option B, which one is the best? I can have a proof, select, iterate, and then the really good things can start happening, because you have a way to reason quantitatively, to decide if something is making the process better or worse. As long as you're completely fuzzy, you just have like an ocean of opinions and so many different people, and also it's again, as long as you have semi-manual process, you can have regression just because someone in your team that was very experienced retired. So the composition of the team change, you change nothing else, and you can have regression, and that's a big problem, because suddenly you have massive confusing factors. I mean, again, if you have to assess your performance of supply chain dependent on whether Bob, who was very very experienced and competent, just retired last year, and that's a confusion variable, that becomes an incredible mess.
Well, there are many. Obviously, it's 500 pages. We're not going to cover everything. I mean, over the course of the rest of the season, I'm sure we'll take bits and pieces and make those episodes. But historically, there are some overarching criticisms that you have of supply chain theory, and one of the most obvious, and it's a big part of the book, is your perspective on time series forecasting, which you call in the book, and I quote, a technological dead end for supply chains. Why is that?
I mean, that's part of the chapter on the future, and I described that. You see, the paradigm at play here is the teleological view of the future. So you're literally saying, I can project the future, and I will say it is this, and I just like let's say the Gauss plan in the USSR. It's literally the same vision. It's I can describe precisely the future, and then this description becomes my commitment, and it becomes the plan. It's super, and again, this perspective originates from the natural sciences. It's exactly the perspective that astronomers are using when they want to anticipate the movement of planets. And by the way, for example, one of the early economic forecasters of the 20th century, Roger Babson, was a massive fan of Newton, and his perspective, which has been permeating entire cycles of economic forecasters and then operation research and then supply chain, was that with the right math, we will soon be able to predict the future of economics, of markets, of everything, with the exact same precision than we can predict the movement, the placement of planets. And obviously, it was part of, I would say, this progressist scientism sort. I use the word scientism because it was not science; it was a certain belief about science. Progressism that was extremely prevalent in the first half of the 20th century, but it never worked. And in fact, you have like many reasons to think it will actually never worked. And it's because it do not preserve your own future agency. It treats the future as if the future was already, frozen, as if you the company itself had no agency to actually change course in the future. And when you think about it, it is very strange. It is very strange. And then I opposed another vision that is a vision of entrepreneurs with a rug vision, which is much more opportunistic. But fundamentally, this grand plan vision, the teleological vision, that seems that you can treat the future as a known quantity and then orchestrate everything from that, is defective. And if I go back to the time series, is the time series are the embodiment of this perspective. Time series see the future as the exact symmetric of the past. You have a curve of temperature. Let's say, for example, I take the curve of temperatures in Paris, 1 data point per day. I have a curve, and I can project this curve into the future, and there is nothing that if I just remove the fact that one date is the present, there is like nothing that differentiates what is the past, what is the future. It's exactly the same sort of series that move. And if I were to look at this time series, and you don't tell me where is the now, it's just impossible to know. It's just a curve, and it goes indefinitely in the past. It continues indefinitely in the future, and that is the time series perspective. And this perspective, which is natural science, is just nonsense for business, because in business you have like an absolute radical asymmetry between the past that you cannot change and the future where you have agency. This is as soon as you start accepting the fact that your company has agency on the future, and that until it commits a resource to something, a specific use, you have no reason to treat this future as if it was already decided.
And again, to be fair, you do go into a bit more detail in this, and you give some not just meteorological examples, but you, in concrete terms, you give the example of what was it? Again, it's the difference between a single big buyer and many small buyers. You used many small baskets versus a few large baskets to demonstrate the problem. So 10 people who buy one thing, one person who buys 10, same time series. Explain a
Yeah,
bit more.
exactly. Here, that's an example. Is that also here I was describing the problem with the agency, but you have also many other problem, and here the problem is time series are a very lossy representation.
What
That's
do you mean by
another
that?
problem. So time series is about compress your information into a one-dimensional vector, and when you do that, you lose information.
Yes.
Again. And this information is very consequential for good supply chain decisions. Again, imagine you have 1,000 units a day for the last 10 years. And what is your correct stock quantity? Well, I can give you two scenarios. Scenario number one, those 1,000 units are 1,000 distinct clients. It's very dispersed. It's not even the same clients every day. And so the odds that you will lose all those clients very sharply, very quickly is very low. Now, example number
two,
second example is those 1,000 units have been ordered by a single client for the last 10 years. At some point, you will lose this client because this company will go bankrupt, or they will do a switch or whatever.
But the potential risk is still huge at all times.
There is no such thing as an eternal client, and there is no such thing as eternal company. So you will lose this client at some point. And then when it happens, the inventory that you have left will be dead stock overnight. And no recourse. It was your only client. Thus, the time series are identical, but the risk profile is extremely different. And the only way to know that is to look at the client composition. So here, that's another problem, in addition to the problem of losing your agency, is that the time series as a mathematical model is actually a lossy representation of the past. And so you lose critical, consequential information.
Well, again, to tie that, because again, I knew you would say the word risk. So again, how does the loss of that risk negatively impact the inventory policies that you make? And this is something you covered in the limits of planning. So again, taking that exact example that you just said, what is the immediate term negative outcome of that versus something like, let's say, taking a more probabilistic approach, which again you outline in the book?
So again, if we look at if we step back, for risk, with this the classical view, the teleological view, which is the one. It's, by the way, the term is complicated, but it's exactly the paradigm about the future that underlie s&op, for example. The s&op process is completely aligned with this specific paradigm. And when you think about it, risk do not exist. It's not. It is just absent. Yes, people are not fools, so they know that there is risk. But when you look at the instruments, the risks are simply absent. There is nothing paradigmatic about risk management. Yes, you can, in theory, do some scenarios and these sort of things. But again, in terms of paradigms, this is just second-class citizen. This is at best an afterthought. It is absolutely not something that really fits into the paradigm. Just think about, because risk is also the other side of the same coin. It's opportunity. It's so you can have something that is unexpected and that create damage, but you can have also something that is unexpected that present an opportunity that you can seize. And again, if you are from this teleological perspective, the s&op perspective, the idea of being like seeking opportunities that are completely unknown, and you're just banking on the fact that you will be at the right place at the right time, ready to address those initiatives, those opportunities. Sorry. It's something that, again, in terms of paradigm, do not exist, just like the risks do not exist. So you see, two sides of the same coin. are, I would say, conceptually absent from those paradigms. And consequently, they are absent from the methods, they're absent from the tools, they're absent from the instruments, etc., etc., etc. And if you've met with, I would say, entrepreneurs, this is absolutely not how the typical entrepreneur think about the future. They definitively, in my experience, I've been meeting with over 100 startups, audited 100 startups, and I had also the opportunity to deal with actually company owners. They do not think about the future as this grand plan that is known. On the contrary, they think of the future as something that is very fuzzy, very unclear. But if you position yourself in the right way and you're prepared, you can be very, very lucky. And I think it was even Aristotle that said that luck is something that happens to the people who are very prepared. But that's a very, very different mindset, and that's a completely different way to look at the future.
Well, again, you advance in contrast to that, you actually advance what you call the rugged vision. How exactly does that differ from what you're describing now?
So the rugged vision, it's instead of trying to think that you can know the future, you just want to be extremely you want to embrace the chaos and leverage it to your advantage. If you think of s&op, people want to have forecasts that are like as accurate as possible. But so that means, in technical terms, you want to reduce the variance. But what if you're doing the exact opposite? You want to explode your variance. Why would you do that? Well, the answer is, for example, in the entertainment industry, what you want is to have like mega hits. You're not interested into having low variance because most of your attempts are failures. That's hit or miss patterns. So if you don't want to reduce the variance, because reduce the variance would mean that everything would converge to mediocrity. What you want is to do things in such a way that when you have like a hit, it is an absolutely massive hit. So that's the rugged vision is a very different take on uncertainty and variability. It sees that as a resource that can be exploited, not as a defect. If you again the teleological perspective, they look at the future as something that needs to be, I would say, clarified, set, immobilized, and then that becomes your forecast, but also your commitment, and you have like orchestration for that. And optimizing means compliance, I would say, to achieve compliance in the most efficient way based on this grand plan for the future. If we go for the rugged vision, this is a perspective that is radically different. It's about exploiting this uncertainty and variability, making sure that you can, when those opportunities will emerge, you will be the first. You will have the first mover advantage because you move so fast to capture them. That you will be able to capture them very profitably. That if you make mistakes, they will not be too costly. It's not about because everything will be like a wager. And what you want is it's completely okay if most of your bets are actually losing, as long as the cost is very limited. And when you win, you want to win big. So that creates a very, very different perspective on what does that mean to plan and prepare. If you're thinking about you want to embrace the fact that you have all this uncertainty and variability because it's the same for your competitors. So instead of thinking I'm going to be more accurate, planning wise, you say I want to be more reactive
and agile,
and profitable and opportunistic. And you literally acknowledge that it's those these very opportunistic moves are part of the plan. And it's also a certain degree of comfort in not knowing exactly where you're heading. You see, it's about I just want to be able to profitably respond to whatever situation, but I don't really need, or I'm not even really interested into knowing exactly what is that, because again, from the rugged perspective, the future is radically uncertain. It's radically different from the past, and also that means that you're thinking about your resources as something where you want to preserve your agency and your opportunities. So you see, you have something that comes your way. It's a nice opportunity, but from the reg vision, you could say, hold on, I'm going to pass. It's nice, it's profitable. Why am I passing? Well, because I think there is a much bigger one that is coming afterward. I don't want to,
All my capital
to just exhaust myself on this thing while there is another one. Just to give you a sort of example, in the with the recent move with the tariff in the Trump administration, you could see that some companies just the tariff where the people kind of anticipated that things would go, there would be severe distortions to be brought on through the tariff. So some companies brought a lot of inventory and say, oh, we brought all this inventory right before the tariff, so we can keep for a couple of months selling those things at the old price. But the rug vision would say absolutely not. This is now that there is this tariff, nobody can actually bring stuff at the same price anymore. So you have no reason. Yes, my competitors will actually liquidate all their inventory on the cheap. That's okay. If it's not perishable, that's okay. I can hold onto this inventory for a few months, and then I will be selling it at a much higher price and have like a very nice margin. And again, that is also something where if you want to really embrace the rug vision, you have to think also of the fact that your agency is given to you by prices.
Yes.
And again, that is something that is very absent from s&op, where and the teleological vision, where the idea that you can play with prices as part of your plan is just extremely absent.
Well, again, and a big part of the economics perspective here is building on the financially adjusted perspective or the ROI driven perspective. And in the book, you introduce the term. It's almost like Jeremy Bentham. You're like, measure everything in coins. You introduce basically a unit of measurement.
Yes.
And coin-denominated objectives. And I'm just curious, how is that different from the historical perspective that we've always had, which is think about the ROI of decisions? Is that just a more all-encompassing perspective?
Yeah, I mean, first, the problem is that most of what passes for, again, the academic literature, so what passes for supply chain coming from the academic literature, where they take this applied mathematics perspective, they would nominally say, we optimize this objective function that is supposed to be dollars or something. But this is not a genuine economic perspective. You see, it is just applied math with an economic theme. This is not the same thing. Here, the thing is that you acknowledge that the economic modelization is really the big difficult challenge, not the technical calculation that result from this modelization. So you see, that's where it's a very, very different perspective. The applied math say, give me your economic function, and then I will do a lot of things with those formulas, and I will derivate all of that. I will construct, prove a theorem, prove this, prove that, etc. Okay, fine. But you see here, if I take this perspective, then yes, my objective function is supposed to be dollars, but in practice, it's just theater. I don't really care, and the people who are producing the paper don't really care about that. And the consequence of that is, in fact, when you look closely about many papers in supply chains, what is being optimized is not even economic terms, which is very frequently service levels or tons of, I would say, non-economic targets. And that reflects the fact that the perspective is fundamentally applied math. What matters is to have a function to optimize. The nature and the specifics of these functions are mostly irrelevant.
Well, again, to get a little bit more practical now, because I think we've covered a good overview of the philosophy, but for people who are interested in more of the nuts and bolts, instituting or installing your vision, the rugged vision, from what I read anyway, required the introduction of at least two roles, not just a philosophy, but you introduced the roles of flow manager and scientist and the importance of that pairing.
No, again, that's later in the book. That is just a detail. The thing is that as long as in terms of paradigm, you're looking at the future the wrong way, you're blocked. You know, nothing can happen. It's just not even possible because those things are not even thinkable. You see, that's why there is this book, this progression. I would say the way you can organize the roles is really a technicality. I described that for clarity, but it is, I would say, it's really of complete secondary importance. You know, as long, you see, if something you cannot even think of something, you can't do it. No matter how you slice and dice the work, no matter how you, if you have instrument or not, you know, it is just not part of the things that are conceivable. And that's what I described. The problem is that when we mention the word planning, it is almost impossible to distinguish between to even think an alternative that is not the planning as it was practiced by the GOS plan in the USSR. It's very strange because the USSR was a failure, and yet when you look at planning as practiced in large companies, they are literally mimicking what has failed for 70 years in the GOS plan. This was this grand planning institute that was supposed to be centrally piloting all of USSR economy. And this has been, it's a very interesting example, which is also covered in the book, because it has been operating the GOS plan from 1925 till 1991. It produced plans for all of those years, and none of those plans were ever feasible. And that's when I discuss with large companies, that's also the sort of vibe that I've been getting for the last almost 2 decades, is that I discuss with companies that do grand plans and they don't work, and they conceptually don't work. And people think, but so if we stop doing this, we stop thinking about the future, and that's not acceptable, because obviously we need to think about the future. We cannot just replace this bad planning by no planning whatsoever. So you need an alternative, and what I'm saying is that forget the roles as long as you cannot think properly, which is a rugged vision. The alternative to the teleological view, any alternative solution is just unthinkable, and thus impossible to deploy in practice in your company.
Well, there are some audience questions I want to get to, but before we do, other than reading the book, so assume the perspective of someone who has read the book and is really jazzed on it. What do you propose are the next steps after that for instituting the rugged vision you just described?
Contact us.
Okay.
But no, I think those things will come very naturally. You know, again, this book is viewed as an introduction, but a lot of things, I hope, becomes very obvious and natural when you have the right perspective. That's why I didn't went, I would say, in detail in the math. You know, it's when you know how to approach a problem, then the resolution becomes very, procedural, technical. Yes. It's just a mundane effort. You see, that's the thing, is that for in school, people, that's another problem that I have with, I would say, the way teaching is done from school, is that from a young age, what we learn is, here is a problem, identify the solution. And you're tested, graded on your capacity to a given problem statement to give a satisfying answer. But the reality is that in the real world, it doesn't work like that at all. The most difficult thing is actually identifying the right problem statement. And once you can think clearly about your problem, resolving it is almost like a given. It's like so easy. In fact, in the future, I would not be surprised if you can actually think clearly your problem, you can hand it over to an LLM, and the LLM will just do this sort of super procedural thinking to actually give you the solution. But really the more difficult, intellectually demanding task with what is the right problem to solve. And so that's why I think through this introduction, I think the reader can part from this book with a very different perspective on how to even think of his company, his supply chain, and even the sort of solutions that are eligible. Because again, as soon as you realize, for example, that tons of techniques in supply chain are non-economic techniques, safety stocks, for example, are a non-economic perspective on supply chain. So if you use safety stock and you're disappointed that you don't get your return, any kind of return on investment, I would say, don't be surprised. It's not even part of the paradigm. Safety stocks are not optimizing in any shape or forms the rate of return. So don't be surprised. And that's the sort of things where, if you, again, going through this book, people would be able to say, okay, this sort of line of thinking is not even in the right, paradigm. It's not even the right mindset. So this thing is a dead end. It will not generate returns because it's not, I'm not even in the correct territory. And once you are in the correct territory, then again, you go back to this principle at Lokad. It's better to be approximately correct than exactly wrong. And yes, you can use very crude instruments. And if you contact Lokad, we would have maybe better instruments to suggest. But again, my take is that if you have the correct thinking and Excel spreadsheet, you can already go a long, long way, as opposed to be lost with, I would say, the wrong take on the problem.
Fundamentally, it's a mindset that you're advocating.
Yes, and for example, again, I would ask the audience, is that could the audience define in just one sentence what economics actually is? And by the way, it was defined very clearly more than a century ago by Lionel Robbins, which is a British economist. And when you ask people, usually they have no clue. And so you see, when I say when I say it is an applied branch of economics, say, how do you define economics? And again, so I have given this concise definition for supply chain, but the concise definition for economics is the study of scarce resources that have alternative uses. And that's, you see, and once you understand all the words that goes into this very tight definition, you understand what economics are about. And again, it's literally, economics can be defined in one phrase. This is critically important. And that's the sort of things that once you really get it, a lot of things becomes very, very clear. And by the way, to the audience, what passes in the media for economics is absolutely not economics. It's political ideology that has like nothing to do with actual economics. Or when you have people commenting things, this is economic history. The unemployment of France is going up or down or blah, 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 blah. This is not economics. This is economic history. That's a very, very different thing. Economic history is it's just descriptive. It is fundamentally not something that give you any deep understanding about what's going on. It is, with economic history, you need an economic theory to kind of make sense of it. So, but that's what economics give you, but that's a completely separate concern.
All right. Well, thank you. And Joannes, I'll push on now to the questions from the audience. As you can see on the banner on screen, feel free to submit them privately. You can, because some of the comments here are DMs, but they're also public questions. This is from Manuel. This is the second book of yours. I've got the first one. What are the big differences between the two, or the big functional differences between the two? The lack of maths and code is one enormous difference.
This one is much better.
Okay.
Yes. The previous one was really rushed. It was done in like 3 months, and the first 100 pages are acceptable. The one that follows are very obsolete now, outdated, completely outdated. So, but the previous book was here is the recipe at Lokad that we approached, called the quantitative supply chain. And at the time, my thinking was, I was not completely sure about what I was pushing. So I was saying, okay, I am in complete disagreement with what is the mainstream supply chain theory. And so I was saying, you know what, I'm going to do something different, and I will call it the quantitative supply chain. And but the reality, and that's the evolution of this book, say now the way I think about it, after it has been quite a few years, I had more time to gain maturity, is that no, what passes for supply chain theory in the literature is just wrong. It is wrong, and that's that chapter number 3, and I clarify that due to it's about those epistemic concerns. Where do you place supply chain? Do you see that as applied math, as sociology, or do you see that as applied economics? And the point that I'm saying is that no, that this is the correct way to think about supply chain. And then I realized, okay, so that was a very, very different stance. Like, do I have yet another theory, or do I say, no, this is what I believe, my best attempt at the most correct supply chain theory I have, which is a replacement of what comes before. Now, the previous books was very much presented as a recipe of the stuff that work at Lokad. It's interesting, by the way, the previous book is now, I would say, a single chapter in the book. It's the chapter called deployment, and that this chapter covers things that are just like the better, more mature version of what I described in my previous book. So it's the previous book is like one chapter out of 11, and this book. But I realized that there was so much more that were under, I would say, as foundations.
Yes.
How do you see supply chain as knowledge? How do you work with this knowledge? So that's epistemology, that the concerns. Economics, in the previous books, I was completely sidestepping. Yes, I was saying we want profitability, but then we have to go back to, okay, economics roots. What are the implications? What does the economic science brings to supply chain? The short answer is quite a lot. So, and then it clarifies, once you approach things under the explicit banner of economics, which I didn't do in the previous book, it clarifies tons of things. And then there was also plenty of other things that I was kind of taking for granted in my lectures, and I realized, no, I really need to go into the fine print. Such as, for example, there is a chapter on information, like the modern theory of information. This is, if you want to have like a good decision, you would think that good supply chain decision, it needs to be informed somehow. But it turned out that there is a very, very powerful theory about information, that's a Shannon theory of information. And again, it is very consequential for supply chain and how you should reason about that. That's just one thing. And then you have to think about the applicative landscape in your company. The software is extremely important. And supply chains are completely digitalized. That's something that I was barely touching in the previous book here. I really clarify the sort of software landscape, how to even think about it, and how to think your stuff, that your optimization that have to be an overlay on top of all of that. And then the future that we discussed, there was also the problem, a deep philosophical difference on how we think the future. And by the way, this chapter came out of the frustration that, because I had probably hundreds of calls where I'm trying to explain this the probabilistic vision of Lokad. But the problem is that when I say probabilistic forecast, it was the wrong approach. I realize it now. The probabilistic forecasting, it's the correct technical answer to the challenge. But that's if you want to understand the correct vision, which is again independent of mathematics, it's teleological vision versus RUG vision, and that gives you the sort of underlying vision that lets you understand why is this instrument even desirable. Same thing about then you want to have a decision that is good because it is informed, and maybe because it is intelligent. Okay, what is intelligence?
You have a chapter on intelligence.
And that's another question, and that's a very fascinating question.
Yes.
But so we have to bring a lot of materials here, especially with the recent developments in machine learning that has profoundly changed the way we even think about intelligence. So we can now think more intelligently about intelligence, I guess. That's better. But that needs to be treated. And same thing about decisions. Now that you, if you think of a supply chain as a piece of economics, then you will see that every decision in supply chain must be approached as an allocation of scarce resource that has alternative use. So you need to think in your company, what are the alternative uses that you have for every single resource that you have. And that again clarify a lot of things. So there is an entire chapter dedicated to decision making because this have to be clarified.
And again, we will definitely come back to that in a subsequent episode. So next question is from Vivek. Thanks for launching the book. I'm sure this will add different perspective from all the supply chain material we have available. Question: are there some use cases of real-world problems of supply chain covered in your new book?
There is a place where I actually describe all what I think about case studies and the fact that it doesn't work. But use cases, you see, use cases are ubiquitous. It is whenever you have an allocation of resource that has alternative uses, it's a use case. So whenever you spend $1 to buy something, you could have used this dollar for something else. So that's an allocation of resource. If you have raw materials that can be used to produce several products and you decide to consume some of those raw materials to trigger a given batch, that's an allocation of resource. If you decide that the finished products are going to be put in this place, they cannot be put in that place. That's an allocation of resource, etc., etc. So the use cases are extremely mundane. And again, that's where I think the sort of supply chain literature got wrong, is that because they don't have like clear idea about what is supply chain, what is a supply chain decision, and clarify that it's an allocation of resource that has alternative uses. People end up, I would say, overcomplicating things for use cases. The use cases are extremely obvious. When you start looking at the problem through this angle, you have the flow, you have resources, alternative use. Every single time you have to make a choice between those alternative use. This is a supply chain decision, and that needs to be optimized. And then to know the payback that you can expect in optimizing this decision, my take is just do a back of the envelope calculation. You know, it's fine. But you see, that's the interesting thing, is that when you that's also the sort of things where I want to depart from the classical take on supply chain, is that due to, I would say, a lack of foundations, you end up with things that are so incredibly unclear. Let's go, for example, supply chain digital twins. What is it truly about? What are you exactly trying to solve? It is a mean to what end exactly? You see, that's, and I think many supply chain authors, consultants, software vendors, academic professors, due to the fact that they don't offer a very clear definition for supply chain, and they don't position supply chain as a branch of economics, you end up with questions that are very difficult to answer, such as use cases, because your foundations are shallow. And once you have the right foundations, it becomes so obvious, which is, by the way, also this book is an attempt, because I had so many calls that were extremely frustrating, because implicitly that's what Lokad was doing. We have been thinking for a decade as those supply chain decisions as allocation of resources that have alternative uses, but we were not framing that in that way, and thus we were kind of lost into explaining why a probabilistic forecast is best. Yes, it's very good, it's very relevant, but that's a technicality. Same thing for stochastic optimization, also very, very good, very useful. But again, that's a technicality that only becomes interesting once you understand the proper paradigm.
All right, well, thank you. Next question from Nick Green. Actually, this is from our YouTube stream, because we dual stream LinkedIn and YouTube. And I'll read it verbatim as it's been put to me. Thank you for making the ebook free in Southeast Asia. Getting Amazon books isn't easy. I look forward to reading. Now, the question, in the book, do you discuss the role of incentives in supply chain?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Save that one for last.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes, you're welcome. Excellent question. And yes, I do. And yes, and that's something that is very important, because you have adversarial incentives all over the place. So that's also something where I think that the traditional supply chain literature got completely wrong. They do not they do not pay attention to the incentives at play. And thus they behave like, unfortunately, savant idiots who are extremely naive with respect to the incentives at play. So you see, and that's the sort of things where it's just again. So yes, incentives matter, and when I say incentives, the incentives of employees in large companies are not aligned with the best interest of the company. People are not evil; they're just self-centered. It is just what it is. So it is okay, no problem. Human nature, but you just need to have something that take that into account explicitly in your theory. Same thing. Consultants have very specific incentives that I detail. So essentially, in the book, I detail the incentives of employees, of consultants, of software vendors, and of academia. And I go into that and how it interplay with your attempt at doing what's best for the long-term interest of the company. So, and yes, it requires very specific cares. And if you do not, I would say, explicitly address this problem as an adversarial problem. So adversarial meaning that you are dealing with people who have agency, so they can do things, and the way they are going to do things is not completely aligned to what is the interest of the company. And there are plenty of situations that are completely broken by design, and you need to recognize them as such. And the important thing about when you have, like, let's say, for example, a conflict of interest is that when there are situations where there is conflict of interest, you cannot just have people, you cannot rely on the judgment of people. If you are conflicted, so you cannot say, oh, I know I'm conflicted, but trust me, I'm a very honest person. It's not how you address conflict of interest. It doesn't work that way. It's essentially when you recognize that someone has a conflict of interest, this person should be barred access to the process that generates the decision. That is fundamental. If you don't do that, it's something that the medical science discovered quite a few decades ago. It's not going to work. So again, I think that part, this is detailed in the book, is that you have to understand what are the I would say the interest at play, the incentives, and the conflict of interest, and then be very prudent on this front. It is very important. Yes.
Fun fact: when you shared the PDF, the initial pre-publication PDF of the book, the first thing I searched for was the section on consultants. It was literally the first one I went to. If you read only one, check it out. Joannes pulls no punches.
I'm also describing, the conflict of interest that enterprise software vendors has, which includes us. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying to do a best effort here, but I am conflicted. So if people want to bring, some other things that I may have omitted in this book, feel free to post comments. I think I've been very thorough about all the shenanigans of enterprise software vendor, because it's something that I know up close, I would say. But again, if people have feedback for me, that would be awesome.
Cool. Well, again, there are no other questions. I will just ask you, closing thought. I mean, let me rephrase it. If people only really read one section of the book, what would you suggest? Obviously, you want them to read all of it. You want them to buy. I'm just saying, because again, you've talked about intelligence. You talked about, obviously, you go through systems of reports, systems of, you go through just so much. But like one takeaway from today.
The one is read chapter 3, epistemology.
There we go.
It's literally the foundation of what even counts as supply chain knowledge. And if you can go to the end of this chapter, you will probably realize that 99% of what you've been reading in your life, once you understand this epistemic take, doesn't even count as part of the relevant body of knowledge for supply chain. That is strange, but that is, and by the way, that is like the clean explanation to why, for the why of my misery for this first decade at Lokad, is that I was fundamentally trying to use the wrong theories. Just like if you try to get success using alchemy instead of chemistry, it's not going to work. So you see, it's if you try to to get your results, and you're mixing products and whatnot, and you're using the alchemic theory, it's nothing is going to work. Why? It's because you're not using the proper science. You're using something that looks like a science. By the way, alchemy was at a point in time very, very serious. Sir Isaac Newton spent half of his life doing research in alchemy, and the other half on the movement of celestial bodies. He published actually 2 equally large books, one on celestial mechanics and the other one about alchemy.
Yeah,
and you see, that's the problem, is that it's not that Isaac Newton was a fool, is that it's actually very difficult to identify the sort of correct paradigm, and if you're wrong, then you can have something that looks like science and again, if just think about it, if Sir Isaac Newton was, could be fooled for like this entire life in pursuing something that we know they do not even recognize remotely as science. You see, don't assume that you can automatically spot in supply chain what should be considered as valid knowledge versus what isn't. And what I'm trying through this chapter 3, is to give to the readers intellectual tools to do just that, sort what qualifies as actually valid knowledge or not. Even if you disregard all the rest of the book, just having this instrument will be extremely useful, because suddenly you will have a way to, separate what is potentially correct knowledge and what is guaranteed to be irrelevant.
All right. Well, I'm convinced. Joannes, I have no further questions. Thank you very much for your time and for your answers. And to everyone else, thank you for attending. Thank you for your questions, many private comments. Again, as I've said many times, and I'll say again, some people are more comfortable commenting publicly. Some people prefer to message me privately. As you see, everything that's sent to me, I pose to you verbatim, or at least as it's given to me. So on that note, be sure to connect with Joannes and me on LinkedIn. And we'll see you next week for another live episode of Breakdown. And on that note, get back to work. Check this out.